Have you ever stopped to think that sometimes the one who seems the strongest is actually the one carrying the most silent pain? Sae-byeok from Squid Game is not just a player trying to win money. She is someone trying to survive in a world that never gave her a chance. The paradox is cruel because while most people fight for ambition, she fights for love and survival. And that makes us reflect on how many times you have felt alone even when surrounded by people. Today, we are going to dive into Sae-byeok's mind and discover what her story can teach us about courage, empathy, and impossible choices. If you are a fan of cinema and psychology and want to understand the mind behind your favorite character, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos. But first, comment below which character you want me to analyze next on the channel. Now let's go to the video. Sae-byeok is the kind of character who speaks little but says everything with a glance. There is something in the way she moves, always on alert, as if the world is about to collapse at any second, and maybe it is, at least hers. In Squid Game, she is not just a player trying to win, but a survivor trying to exist in a world that never allowed her to live in peace. Every silence she carries holds a swallowed scream, a story the world forgot to listen to. She comes from the north, from a country surrounded by invisible walls where dreaming is a dangerous act. And when she decides to escape, Sae-byeok is not just crossing a geographical border, she is trying to escape an emotional prison. There is something deeply human about that, because who has never wanted to start over, leave the past behind, and build a new version of themselves? But as she discovers, the weight of memory always crosses any sea. What stands out is the contrast, because on the outside she seems cold, almost made of stone, but inside there is a small yet intense flame that refuses to go out. This duality creates a constant tension, the tension of someone who wants to trust but has been betrayed too many times. It is the kind of pain you can't see, but that shapes every gesture. You can see it in the way she watches others, always half a step behind, as if measuring danger before taking a breath. Sae-byeok is not looking for applause or redemption. What she wants is something much simpler and therefore much harder. Security, a home, a place where her brother can sleep without fear. And it's curious how sometimes what drives the strongest people is not ambition, but necessity. She fights not because she wants to win, but because losing is not an option. And deep down, that makes her even more human. There is also something poetic in her solitude. The way she observes the world, as if she has already seen the worst it can offer. It is as if she understands that to survive, she had to numb her heart, and in doing so, she lost a part of herself. How many times have we done the same? How many times have we hardened ourselves not to break without realizing that in the process, we stopped feeling? When we look at Sae-byeok, we see more than a character. We see the reflection of an entire generation of people who learn to live defensively, who confuse strength with insensitivity. And she shows us, silently, that there is courage even in not showing weakness. But that armor, as solid as it seems, begins to crack when the game demands something more than survival. What makes Sae-byeok fascinating is that she is not a traditional heroine. She does not fight for justice or seek recognition. She just wants to reunite her family, to find meaning in so much suffering. And that is what makes her real. Because deep down, we all have a simple reason that keeps us going even when the world crushes us. Hers is love, disguised as silence. But perhaps the most intriguing thing about Sae-byeok is not what she shows, but what she hides. There is an untold story in every scar, a trauma pulsing in every decision. And that is where the real game begins, not the one in the series, but the internal one, where the enemy is the past itself. Sae-byeok's story begins in a place where freedom is a forbidden word. Growing up in North Korea means living in forced silence, where even the wind seems to watch. She learned early that dreaming can be dangerous, and that showing hope is almost an act of defiance. That is why, when she escapes, she takes almost nothing, only courage. And courage is sometimes the only passport possible for those who truly want to breathe. Escaping is not just running, it is carrying the weight of what you left behind. She crossed borders with her body, but her heart remained trapped on the other side. There is an invisible scene in her life, a girl crossing the ice, the cold cutting her face, and the fear of looking back because the past might catch her. That scene stays alive inside her even when the game begins. And that is what sets her apart from the other players. She had already played a game of life and death long before arriving there. The trauma of escape does not end when you reach the other side. Because what no one tells you is that exile does not end upon arrival. It continues inside the mind. In South Korea, Sae-byeok does not find paradise, but a new kind of prison, indifference. It is a world that does not recognize her, that treats her as invisible, an intruder in a system that only values those who have already won. And it is curious how sometimes freedom can also hurt. There is something deeply human in that, escaping from one hell only to discover that paradise also comes with a price. Sae-byeok works, fights, bleeds, but the system does not want her to exist. And that is where the silent rage is born, the anger toward a world that promises opportunities but delivers walls. That rage is not destructive, it is the fuel that keeps her alive. A kind of fury that does not scream, only takes a deep breath and keeps going. The cruelest part is that even outside North Korea, she remains a prisoner of fear. The fear of being caught, of losing her brother, of never finding her mother again. And those who live in constant fear become experts at hiding emotions. That is why she seems cold. But that coldness is a survival strategy. It is the body saying, don't show what you feel, or the world will use it against you. When she enters the games, Sae-byeok is not there out of ambition. She is there out of necessity. Every step inside the arena is a reminder of what is at stake, the chance to bring her mother back, to give her brother a dignified life. It is not about money, it is about dignity. It is about not letting her story end the same way it began, with fear, hunger, and silence. And that motivation turns every movement she makes into an act of resistance. The interesting thing is that when we know her story, we realize Sae-byeok is not cold. She is cautious, she is not distant, she is tired. Life demanded that she become an adult too soon, and that kind of early maturity leaves invisible scars. She carries in her eyes the weight of someone who has seen the worst and is still standing. And that, let's be honest, is more heroic than any happy ending. But there is something that has not yet been said, something deeper than escape, more painful than fear. Because before becoming this hardened woman, Sae-byeok was just a girl trying to save her own family. And that is where her first trauma lies, abandonment and loss, the kind of pain that turns any soul to stone. Internal conflicts and traumas, abandonment and loss of family abandonment has its own sound. It is not silence nor a scream. It is the space between the two. It is what Sae-byeok carries from the moment she was separated from her mother when the promise of reunion became the only thread keeping her standing. Imagine living with the constant feeling that someone you love is somewhere suffering and you are powerless to change it. It is a pain that does not heal. It only sleeps and awakens in the worst moments. From an early age, she understood what it means to be the adult of the house, while other girls dreamed of the future. Sae-byeok learned to negotiate, steal food, protect her brother. Being a child was never an option, and that kind of premature maturity creates a wound that life cannot heal. Because when you take on the role of savior, you start believing that any failure of yours is a sentence for those who depend on you. The cruelest thing about abandonment is that it teaches you to distrust, even love. Sae-byeok avoids getting close to people because deep down she believes that everything she touches eventually goes away. It is the trauma speaking, fear disguised as coldness. And who hasn't done that? How many times have we pretended indifference to avoid disappointment? She does the same, except for her, loving means risking losing everything. This family void shapes her behavior in the game. She does not trust easily, but when she does, she is loyal until the end. That is what happens with Gyeong, an unlikely but genuine friendship. For the first time, Sae-byeok relaxes, shows what lies behind her hardened gaze. And the tragic part is that just when she allows herself to feel, the game takes that from her. As if life insists on reminding her that every hope comes with a price. Abandonment also makes her extremely protective of her brother. He is her last link to what remains of the family, her only reason to keep fighting. But that responsibility is heavy, almost unbearable, because she not only wants to save him from the world, but also from the same pain that transformed her. But no one can protect someone from feeling, and that is what eats away at her inside. The fear of repeating the cycle. Curiously, it is this pain that makes her so human. Abandonment taught her the value of presence, even if she herself no longer knows how to fully surrender. Every time she helps someone, There is a silent attempt to make up for what she could not do in the past. It is the unconscious trying to rewrite its own story. And that is something many of us do without realizing, trying to heal in others what still hurts in ourselves. But the problem is that living for the past is like running in circles. Sae-byeok carries the guilt of not having reunited her family, even knowing it was never her fault. And guilt, when untreated, becomes a prison. That is why she does not smile, does not relax, does not dream. Because dreaming requires believing that the future is possible, and she is still trying to accept what she lost. And even so, there is something inspiring in that pain. Because despite everything, she keeps going. Even without guarantees, even without anyone around. Abandonment broke her, but also shaped her. But this constant struggle to protect others hides an even deeper wound, the fear of not being enough to save them. And that is where her second trauma is born, guilt and helplessness. Guilt and the fear of helplessness. Sae-byeok carries guilt, like someone carrying a backpack full of stones. Every decision is heavy, every step calculated, because she fears failing those who depend on her. This fear is silent but constant, like a clock that never stops ticking. And you can tell that for her, there is no rest because life taught her early that any mistake can cost dearly. It is a tension that eats away inside even when the outside seems calm. Helplessness is her daily ghost. Nothing she does seems enough, not even escaping from the north, protecting her brother, or surviving the games. It is the feeling that the world will always be one step ahead and that no matter how fast you run, you can never catch up. Who has never felt that? Her trauma is universal. The fear of not being capable, of disappointing, of failing those who matter most. This guilt shapes how she relates to others. She avoids getting attached, avoids creating expectations. Every gesture of trust is measured as if she is testing whether it is safe to care. And that defense is not coldness, it is a survival strategy. Deep down, Sae-byeok knows that if she lets herself be carried away by affection, she will be vulnerable to a world that has always been ready to hurt her. Inside the game, guilt and fear appear in small choices: whom to help, whom to watch, when to act. Everything is calculated because one mistake could cost not only her life, but the chance to fulfill her greater mission to protect her brother. This responsibility shapes every step she takes, making her precise and resilient. But it also keeps her emotionally isolated, always on the edge of any deeper bond. The interesting thing is how this trauma makes her paradoxically strong and fragile at the same time. She endures pressures others could not, but lives through a silent, invisible emotional exhaustion. And this inner struggle is what makes her captivating. We feel empathy because we understand, even partially, the weight of carrying responsibilities that should never have been hers. Anyone watching can see that her strength is not just physical, it is emotional. At the same time, guilt is fuel. It drives Sae-byeok to act, to not give up, to fight until the last second. It is a dark but powerful motivation. Every victory, every gesture of protection is also a silent attempt at redemption, an effort to make up for what life stole from her. And it is in this constant tension that we perceive the complexity of her soul. But there is a price. The fear of powerlessness makes any mistake intolerable. Sae-byeok refuses to relax, refuses to fully trust, even when there are reasons to. It is an armor that protects, but also imprisons. And the paradox is cruel. The more she tries to control, the heavier the weight of uncertainty feels. It is like trying to hold back the sea with your hands. And it is precisely this fear and guilt that connect to the next trauma life as survival, not as existence. Because when you live only to avoid failure, what remains of humanity within you? It is at this point that Sae-byeok's story deepens, revealing the extent of the psychological strain that shapes her every choice. Life as survival, not as existence for Sae-byeok. Living was never simply existing. Living always meant surviving. Every step, every choice is a silent calculation between risk and reward. And this life of constant vigilance drains emotional energy, leaving little room for dreams or peace. It is as if the world imposed cruel rules: survive or disappear. And when you find yourself in this state, the line between living and merely existing begins to blur. The psychological effect of this is profound. When you survive for so long just to avoid dying, emotion becomes a luxury. Sae-byeok learned to hide desires, to silence fears, to hold back tears. What could have been joy turns into constant alertness. And this condition creates a nearly unbreakable persona, but one that is hollow inside. A body and mind trained to endure but not to feel. It is interesting to observe how this affects her interactions with others. She approaches in a calculated way, maintains emotional distance, measures every word and gesture. Any vulnerability can be exploited, and she has learned that trusting too much is dangerous. This need for protection creates invisible barriers, but also evokes admiration because there is a silent courage in those who face the world without giving in, even when the soul is exhausted. Constant survival also leaves invisible scars. The urgency to win, the haste in every movement, creates exhaustion that few notice. Every decision carries the weight of life or death, and the mind becomes a minefield of strategic thoughts. Sae-byeok lives on an emotional tightrope, balancing hope and despair, fear and courage. While trying to maintain control over what is left of her life, this life of permanent alertness creates a kind of coldness that is both defense and adaptation. She seems distant, but she is merely realistic. The world offers no room for illusions, and she learned that early. Every gesture of self-preservation is, in truth, a strategy of emotional survival. But even coldness has its limits, and small moments of humanity slip through, revealing that behind the hardness there is someone who still feels. The paradox is that survival, though necessary, steals essential experiences of life. Sae-byeok watches others and feels a silent pang of envy for those who can smile without fear, love without guilt, dream without pain. It is a constant reminder that being alive is not the same as truly living. This awareness follows her through every game, every risky decision, shaping her movements and choices. And, interestingly, this awareness makes her more strategic. Those who survive out of necessity learn to anticipate risks, to calculate moves, to understand the value of patience and silence. Every choice is measured, every action has purpose. But this learning comes at a price, emotional exhaustion, that no one but her can see or fully understand. It is a loneliness that accompanies survival, and it is precisely this exhaustion that connects to the next point, the reason she entered the games. Because when life is already a constant exercise in endurance, any opportunity to change fate becomes irresistible, and that is where Sae-byeok's motivation is revealed. Mixing necessity, hope, and family love, reason for entering the games. Sae-byeok does not enter the games for ambition, fame, or adventure. She enters because she must, because she needs money, a real chance to change her brother's fate. Every step inside the arena is a step toward hope, an attempt to reclaim what the world took from her. And this necessity turns every movement into strategy, every gesture into calculated survival. For her, the prize is not luxury, it is life. The money is not merely a reward, it is the promise of freedom, of reconstruction. It symbolizes the possibility of finding her mother, of ensuring food, a safe roof, a minimally decent future. And this motivation makes her different from many other players who see victory only as a selfish goal. For Sae-byeok, winning means protecting, healing wounds, and creating a safe path for those she loves. There is also something deeply human about this, the idea of risking everything for love. Sae-byeok's brother is not just someone she protects, but the link to what remains of her humanity. This connection turns courage into more than instinct for survival. It becomes purpose. It is as if each game were a metaphor for life, to risk oneself to protect what matters most, even when everything seems lost. And it is curious how this need shapes her interactions. She does not approach others out of whim, but out of utility and loyalty. Every bond she builds is considered because she knows the value of time, trust, and protection. This constant calculation comes from her past. Those who grow up in adversity learn to measure risks, to choose allies, and not to be deceived by empty promises. Every relationship is strategic, but still genuine. The decision to enter the games also reveals a silent courage. While others may hesitate, paralyzed by fear, Sae-byeok accepts the arena as an opportunity. It is a choice between continuing to survive passively or fighting for something greater. And it is at this point that we see her inner strength. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is acting despite it. Every step she takes in the game is an affirmation of life. Curiously, this motivation combines hope and despair. Money is only the means, the chance to reunite her family is the end. Every risk she takes is charged with silent emotion, and that is what makes her story so compelling. The audience understands that for her, losing is not an acceptable possibility. Every move is calculated, every decision vital, and that turns each of Sae-byeok's actions into a powerful emotional drama. But there is also the weight of responsibility. Entering the games means carrying her brother's life in every step, every decision, every bet. She understands that the prize does not erase the pain or heal the past, but it offers a real chance to change the future. And this awareness turns her presence in the arena into something much more complex than simple survival. It is love, disguised as strategy. And it is precisely this mixture of necessity, hope, and love that leads us to reflect on how these factors shape her personality and choices. Because when life teaches you to survive and love demands risk, the result is someone capable of extraordinary strength and deep vulnerability at the same time, and it is at this point that Sae-byeok becomes unforgettable. Everything in Sae-byeok is measured. Every gesture has a reason. Her apparent coldness is the result of years of abandonment and survival. It is not indifference, it is protection. She learned to hide vulnerability, to assess risks, to trust only when absolutely necessary. This caution turns every step she takes into a silent strategy, but at the same time, reveals the complexity of someone who has learned to balance strength and fragility. The need to protect her brother and the guilt she carries shape her most important decisions. She acts with calculation, weighing consequences, always with the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Every choice is not only about surviving, but about ensuring that no one else suffers because of her. And it is exactly this blend of rationality and humanity that makes her so admirable and real. The trauma of abandonment and loss manifests in how she handles relationships. Sae-byeok avoids attachment, but when she bonds, she is intense and loyal. This duality, selective closeness and emotional isolation, defines how she interacts in the game. She does not trust easily, but when she does, she protects with silent, stubborn strength. It is the complexity of humanity trying to balance love and self-preservation. Life as survival also shapes her. She learned not to waste emotional energy on what is not essential. Every gesture, every move, every word is measured. This strategic posture makes Sae-byeok efficient, but also lonely. It is the armor that keeps her alive, but also creates distance between her and other players, reinforcing the contrast between external strength and internal vulnerability. Guilt and fear of powerlessness make her hyper-aware of her mistakes and their consequences. Every wrong step could cost dearly not only to her, but to those she loves. And this constant awareness turns every decision into an act of almost superhuman responsibility. But this same pressure reveals her courage, because she keeps going even knowing the risk is immense, and that inspires those who watch. The motivation to enter the games also influences her behavior. She does not seek personal advantage, but protection and hope for her family. This clarity of purpose makes her resilient, but also selective in her relationships and choices. Every action is guided by the silent love she feels for her brother, a thread that keeps her humanity intact even in a brutal environment. That is the strength of intention behind action. Curiously, all these factors combine into a delicate balance between strength and fragility. Sae-byeok is calculating but emotional, silent but deeply present, resilient but vulnerable. It is this complexity that makes her unique and human, someone we can identify with even if her circumstances are extreme. She is a demonstration of how trauma and love shape choices and character, and it is precisely this intertwining of experiences, traumas, and motivations that leads us to reflect on what Sae-byeok teaches us. Because when life forces someone to survive, love, and protect at the same time, it creates a combination of courage and humanity that is hard to forget. And it is at this point that we reach topic 8, what Sae-byeok teaches us, revealing the silent legacy of her story. Sae-byeok reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. She faces the impossible every day, not to be admired, but to protect those she loves. And that makes us reflect, how many times in life have we let fear paralyze us? Her courage is silent, almost imperceptible, but deeply transformative. It is the strength of one who fights not for glory, but for survival and love. So, what did you think of Sae-byeok's story and mind? Could you feel the weight of her choices and how each step was guided by love and survival? Tell me in the comments which character you want me to analyze in the next video. I want to hear your opinion. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep learning about the psychology of characters and stories that make us reflect. Your presence here makes all the difference, and together we can explore even more of these incredible narratives.